that just?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, good to be
I
here.
know.
You getting it all ready for us?
I'm getting the room all ready, making sure everything's in place. Yeah.
I see they're recording us now, so.
Yeah, let's wait one more minute before we.
I'll stop talking about my cat then.
That's the part about all these Zoom meetings I'll miss the most, is seeing everyone's dogs and cats and hedgehogs. Okay, it is 8 o'clock. I would like to call the March 22nd Whatcom County Public Utility District Commission regular meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and Annette Smith will be leading us in the pledge this morning.
Good morning. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Annette. The next item is the approval of the agenda. So are there any proposed changes to the agenda?
Were there any email updates to the agenda, or is it the same agenda?
As far as I know, it should be the one that was.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Chris, are you?
Oh, that's the latest one.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Is that a second, Mike?
I'm sorry, yes, there's a second.
Great. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. The motion carries. Thank you. The next item is the consent agenda. So we have the approval of the meeting minutes from the regular meeting of March 8th and the approval of claims for March 22nd.
I'll make a motion to approve this consent agenda as it reads.
I'll second.
Great. There is a motion and a second, but I did have so for more discussion here, I just had two very minor changes to the notes, which I talked to Ann about this morning, but I want to let the two of you know. One is that Jeff Randall's name was listed as Jack Randall. So just changing that. And then under the broadband program update, the very last sentence, that instead of saying that NoaNet will be setting up an internet service provider, I would like us to change that to NoaNet will be conducting a feasibility study about setting up a public internet service provider. So Chris.
And Commissioner Murphy, that reflects accurately what's going on. NoaNet is actually conducting only a feasibility study for this.
What? That minor change in words? Oh, well, we were about to establish an ISP, and now we're not.
Well, there's a motion and a second on the table. Can I, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, great. So moving on, the next item on the agenda is public comment. Anne, could you please help us with this?
I wanted to say, by the way, I really like the minutes and the new form of the minutes. Just wanted to compliment you on that.
Thank you. Looks like we have Todd Legacy.
Welcome, Todd. Todd, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name's Todd Legacy. I'm the 40th Legislative District State Committee member. And I want to encourage the PUD to put past budgets online beyond 2021. Past budgets are a window back into the priorities and expectations of a government agency. And I think they're really important. And in this time and age, the city of Bellingham does it for multiple years back, and I hope the PUD can do it. I'm heartened by the PUD and strategic goal number 6. So much good can be done by taking the profit out of utilities and reinvesting in our community. I went to Port Townsend last summer and just anecdotally noticed how many more commercial buildings have solar in Port Townsend with Jefferson County PUD than apparently exist in Whatcom County. I also grew up in Oregon, and we had a power cooperative there. And even though my parents sold their house in 1994, I still get checks from that power cooperative as a reinvestment back. And they're not the small checks that I get from being from residuals in movie stunt work of 30 cents or 60-cent checks. These are $100, $300, $50 checks I get. And so having the ability to reinvest that money into our community, I know that we won't have a power cooperative here, but taking that profit and actually reinvesting it, I think is something that speaks not just to Democrats, not just to Republicans, but every member of Whatcom County that pays a utility bill. I do sit on the Lummy Island Ferry Advisory Committee, but I'm just here as an individual person today. But in our discussions there, coming up has been the power needs out there. And in looking at some of the strategic goals of the PUD, I think that there's some real possible synergies because PSE can't run or doesn't have the power out there for the electric ferry that they want to have. And so the PUD might be in a unique position to actually develop some clean energy on site out there where PUD doesn't have the power delivered out there right now. And so I would encourage the PUD to start talks with PSE or with Whatcom County and come in as a partner on the Lummy Island Ferry electrification project out there. And then I also wanted to just throw some spaghetti against the wall and see if it sticks about the Intalco restart. As you guys look at, as the PUD looks at the ability to provide clean energy, just doing some basic math or reading some of the stuff, it doesn't look like there's enough energy available for the Intalco restart. So why can't we put a big solar farm out there and actually just provide the power to them? And I think that there's probably support for that in the county for a bond or a levy to go out. And if you do the basic math, I think I looked it up, BPA's rate is $35 a kilowatt hour or megawatt hour, excuse me. That seems to pencil out over about 10 years or so. And then that would actually be money that could be used to reduce the levy or property taxes or bond that people paid into. So anyhow, I just want to say thanks for keeping on. And I know COVID's been really tough, and thank you for what you're doing. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for the comment, Todd. And Chris, we'll be talking about the Intalco restart during your GM update. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's one
Okay.
of 4 items I want to talk about.
Okay, great. Fellow commissioners, any responses at this time?
Yeah, I want to just first thank Todd. Todd's been an active member of the community, contributing to many conversations at local government. I just wanted to thank Todd for his work in doing the investigation. And if there's anything we can do to make folks like him who are always looking to constructively contribute to what local governments are doing, let's try to help him. I don't know if what he's asking for with budget type information is something that is something to how we can address that, but I'll leave that up to staff to do that. But I just find that Todd's always got very thoughtful comments. I wanted to thank him for that. On the Lummy Island Ferry subject, you know, there's what's happened is the county was originally planning to do that as a diesel repower, and do it as a diesel electric repower, so that perhaps leaving some flexibility of replacing the diesel engine with something else. And the reason that an electric only option was not viable, as Todd pointed out, is because of electric supply. But some have suggested that perhaps an energy storage solution would be a way to provide the fast charging needs of the ferry, and then also provide additional backup for folks on the island in an emergency. So anyway, there's it's actually still in the county's capital improvement plan as a diesel repower, but the community wants something better. They want an electric ferry.
And I know that Brian and Steve at one point were involved in discussions with the group that's working on that. So Chris, let's just make sure that you pick up that thread and are in the loop on where they were at with that.
Will do.
We do have another hand up, so I want to make sure we get to our next public comment. Rick Miracle, are you? Can we move you to a panelist? Looks like you're still muted. There you go.
Muted?
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay.
Morning.
Greetings from Montana.
Wow.
Just one comment about the idea of using solar arrays at the Intalco property to supply them with power. To have a solar array large enough to supply Intalco with 24/7 power, that would include enough to recharge storage so that they could get power around the clock when the sun's not shining in the middle of the winter, would require a solar array of approximately 100 square miles. So I don't think their property is large enough to handle that.
Thanks, Rick.
It's a lot of area, and I just want to clarify, it's probably not 100 square miles. If I recall, Steve, that when we were looking at 300 megawatts, it was, and just as in terms of capacity factor, which is not the same as actually delivered, it was 1,000 acres. So maybe 3,000 acres, but the point is still completely valid. It's a huge amount of space.
So let me just address this piece of it outside of the Intalco update. And so the way this works, the actual solar resource here is about 22%. So let's call it 20% just to make the math easy. The best bid that I've seen is 5 acres per megawatt. At 20%, you would need 5 times the connected load. That would be 2,000 megawatts, and that would be exactly 10,000 acres, which, if my math is right, it's about 18 square miles. So huge. The other thing is Intalco only owns the land that it's actually sitting on. All of the rest of the land is owned by other private owners and the tribe and port and others. So, you know, there just isn't that much land out there. And then you'd need storage. My guess would be that the actual cost of a solar plus storage out there to serve Intalco would be somewhere in the $80 to $100 a megawatt hour range, perhaps more. So it wouldn't be competitive with what's available on the market today.
Yeah, thank you. And that's why maybe storage may be the more practical thing to put in a space confined space where we don't have that much space. Maybe storage can be more of a help.
And we'll have an opportunity to discuss this a little bit more when I give the Intalco update.
Looks like we don't have any other comments.
Great. Thank you, Anne. And thanks to our public commenters for joining us this morning. We're moving on to.
Didn't Mike have something?
Oh,
Sorry.
I don't see any more hands. We can give it another second.
Mike's
here.
got his.
Oh, I'm not seeing it, but are you, Atul?
No, Mike Murphy wants
Murphy.
to make a comment.
Oh, I thought you meant one of a public commenter, because we have an attendee named Mike too. Mike Murphy.
Yeah, thank
Good to see
you.
Sorry about that.
Nope, that's okay. You know, I'm wondering why we only talk about solar when we also have wind. And Cherry Point has some of the best wind in our county coming off the bay there. And, you know, when it's cloudy, there's wind. And when a beautiful day, there may still be wind. I don't know why they couldn't work together to provide the energy needs. So I just didn't understand why wind was not discussed. It's just solar. Just throwing it out there.
Well, Atul, you know more about this than I do, but do we have a moratorium on wind at this
We
time?
do, but there's also, it's on the docket. The county is planning to adopt a new wind moratorium, and I'm on the subcommittee that's rewriting the wind ordinance for the county.
Great.
So it's happening.
Let's move on to old business, and if we want, we can circle back to some of this in commissioner reports. So moving on, the first item under old business is the broadband program update. So Chris, will you be kicking that off, or will that be Andrew?
I'm going to kick it over to Andrew.
Great.
We've had a lot of things go on in kind of a short period of time, and I know we're going to talk more about that. Go ahead, Andrew.
Good morning, commissioners. Chris. We had a really good legislative session. State of Washington is definitely upholding its commitment and promise to broadband infrastructure, funding the state broadband office at $50 million. The CURB, Community Economic Revitalization Board, at $25 million, and the Public Works Board at $25 million. So a big win for all of us. It's a good time to be involved in broadband. The bills we've talked about, House Bill 1673, is the pre-application process for the PWB for their infrastructure loan and grant program for providers contesting projects. Mia Gregerson's bill 1723, which creates resources aimed at improving affordability and access for broadband. They received $5 million in digital equity. It creates a $5 million digital equity planning grant program. And Lisa Wellman's bill, which is Senate Bill 5715, which we talked a lot about, revises the definition of broadband, increases those speeds for broadband service from 25.3 to 100 down 20 up. So that gives me what we all need, I should say, for us to move forward. We can now identify large polygons around the county where we know are currently not receiving 100 down 20 up speeds. There's also other smaller areas where other providers have fiber or CATV in the area, and they'll contest the project if we apply for projects in their existing footprint area. So what we want to do is break these project areas down into smaller polygons at the census block, most granular level we can get. Throw FCC Part 477 data on there, go out there physically with boots on the ground verification, identify where that infrastructure ends. And then what we can do is we can create these polygon areas that we know the infrastructure is not there and where they're not receiving 100 down 20 up speeds, and throw in the third-party crowdsourced data that's available to us, the MLab, Microsoft, Ookla, and any other data sets that may come available to us. And what we'll be able to do in about a month, I think we'll have a really good project areas that we can come back with for some of these upcoming grant dollars. So the time's now to start having these conversations with providers so we can negotiate what a partnership arrangement might look like with them. And what we know from past rounds of broadband funding, especially with the NTIA dollars that are coming down the pipe, we'll be looking for 10% matching dollars. And those can be up to, if it's the same as last time, up to $25 million. So we're looking around for $4 to $5 million in matching dollars. That's what I have. It's a lift, but we've been talking about it and we're going to be prepared. And Chris and I have a strong game plan. So I'll kick it over to you, Chris, for anything else that I may have missed.
Well, I just want to make sure that the big picture's in view here. Our intent is to get every qualified project on the table for the next round. So, instead of going after 4 project areas that are really home runs, we want everything out there. And if we get 4 more, great. If we get 14 more, even better. And, the more, the better. I don't know how long this funding is going to be available, and we want to make sure that Whatcom County is at the front of the line for all of it.
Chris?
Commissioner Murphy.
So between you and Andrew, do you actually have something as a schedule instead of just telling me a month from now? Are you saying by the end of April, we'll see this, by the end of May, we'll see that? What is the actual planned schedule so I can at least pass that on to somebody?
Yeah, so it's a staggered schedule. What's driving it is not when we'll have our work done, but when the grant application period's open. And some, I think, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, the curb grants are the ones that open in mid-April, or are they the ones that open in mid-May?
We'll we'll see that happen in May timeframe. The NTIA NOFA will probably drop, I've heard May 16th, which is the notice of funding opportunity.
Yeah. So Mike, that's really what's driving this. It's not, we want to be ready with everything as these grant windows open so that we can apply as quickly as possible. We don't know when the grant windows exactly are going to open. It depends on how long it takes these agencies to write the rules now that the laws have been passed. So that's kind of what we're waiting on. But the estimates are between, mid-April and sometime in early June, all of these different agencies should have their funding requirements open.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris, because when I talk to people, they're tired of hearing me say, well, we're on it, we're working on it. They want to have something. I will tell them now, we're looking at April, maybe end of May to really. Well,
yeah, that's when these grant periods open. So we'll apply rapidly, and then the agencies have to do the evaluations, and it may take them a while to march through the evaluations and then make the awards. So it could be some months before we know whether we're successful. But our objective is to get in there, and really put our best foot forward and say, these are areas that are truly unserved or underserved. They fit the criteria of the grant, and we have the wherewithal to move forward.
Okay, I appreciate that, because now I'm going to change. I'm not going to make any promises like by the end of May. You're saying we may not know anything by till the who knows when, end of summer even, or whatever.
Yes, but the best predictor of future performance is relevant past performance. That's the old Dr. Phil saying. And in this case, the state agencies have been pretty good about turning these applications around in a couple of months. It's not like some grants where you make an application and 2 years later you hear. It's not like that. These guys have been turning them around pretty darn quick.
Thank you.
So regarding the matching fund requirements, so there are possibilities at other local governments for matching funding, and then there's also foundations like the Mount Baker Foundation, which has expressed an interest in helping advance broadband in the county. Steve had numerous meetings with Mount Baker Foundation, and I don't know if you've had any meetings yet with them, Andrew and Chris, but I think it's be a good opportunity to do that then as you prepare for these. And then of course the county's got substantial funding coming from the state and federal government that I think some of it has arrived, and might be interested in seeing their dollars multiplied this way as well. So I'm sure you guys are on top of it, but just wanted to make sure to mention that.
Thank you.
So Andrew, I have a question if it's okay.
I'm here.
Yeah, so the question is about the new adoption of a definition. So does the state then no longer, meaning like, okay, so things like the RDOF boundaries, is the state still honoring the RDOF boundaries if they're higher than 120, what is it, 120? It's still honoring those boundaries?
Yes, because in our community, we have RDOF areas where the provider has indicated they'll deliver gig services. So
Right.
we're not eligible for grant dollars at the state level in those polygon areas. The polygon areas that providers received support for wireless connectivity, we're eligible to apply for grant dollars inside those polygon areas. We're
Okay.
just knocked out of the areas where providers indicated they're going to deliver gigabit speeds.
Gigabit speeds. So the has the state in their definition defined a methodology for testing?
For testing, you mean,
That 120, is that a general statement, or is that saying based on this algorithm?
we'll have to show evidence of unserved area in the polygon areas. And what we know from past rounds is that they look at the NTIA National Broadband Map, which has census tract data for the median download upload with Ookla, Microsoft, MLab speed tests. And what we can do is we can break that down to the census block level. And we have more granular data by using the state broadband office data, which is at the address point, and some of the more granular Ookla data and boots on the ground verification. Those are all ways that we show evidence of unserved area. And we know that they're not receiving 100 down. So we use publicly available data sets, and that's been supported by the agencies in the past. But it's on us to show evidence of unserved.
So it's on us, and so it's there's a lot of areas where there, in our county certainly, where there's not actual tests, where a lot is done by inference on relatively nearby tests. And so I guess what I'm wondering about is that we have to build a case, but if we provide a solid case where the data supports our statement, then we should prevail. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Well, remember, this is a hurdle for applying for the loan, or applying for the grant, pardon me. And it doesn't guarantee you get the grant. It just guarantees that you have an eligible place to be examined for a grant.
Right. And there's lots of other things, like if you exceed $10,000 per home pass, you don't score us. I mean, the list goes on and on. So it's a competitive grant process.
And how you prove the existing speed is one element of that.
And frankly, if you're in a debate with the local telecom providers over what radio services provide, that'll obviously not increase the likelihood of you getting scored high as far as competitive scoring. Meaning things that are very much contestable or in a boundary where it's not clear exactly what the speed is. Will that, you think, hurt the scoring of a project? Or will that just be a constraint? You either meet the category of being in an area that's unserved, or you don't. Or do you think that that'll actually affect how a proposal gets scored? Meaning, will proposals that have overlap or potential overlap be scored lower? That's something for us to think about.
I think you're right. I think we do need to think that through, and that's
I'm
conversations
not
we're having with the state broad. Go ahead.
I'm not asking you to answer that question definitively right now, not having read the proposal in the last 5 minutes, I mean, the art solicitation, just something to think about.
Well, we've seen it's interesting where the policy is going to go on this. And so it's helpful to have what we'll be doing is having conversations with the state broadband office and giving them those projects and say, what would you do if we handed this in?
That's really good reason why projects out there. That's why you're taking this approach. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Got it. We're going to learn is what the point is here. Yeah.
So I participated in the telecom committee that WPUDA did, and I sent you some notes, Andrew, from that. And I know you're tracking these too, but I mean, they at every one of those telecom meetings, they kind of go through every single state and federal grant that's coming our way. So and it's everything from the BEAD funding to the state broadband office. And so we're, the funding streams are coming fast and furiously from several different directions. And you all are on that, right? With the different grants and tracking them all.
Yes, we're aware of them.
Great. do a lot of, so I know that with the grants that the port submitted, they actually had to show that they were partnering with a private internet service provider. Is that a requirement for several of these grants as well? Or to be determined?
Well, I think that all of them require demonstration of connectivity. In other words, they won't fund fiber out in the middle of nowhere that's not connected to either end.
Right.
So,
Okay.
at some point, even, the assumption is that there's an ISP involved, whether it's a public or a private ISP.
Okay.
The model that we're using obviously is a private ISP, preferably more than one, and dark fiber. So it's doing all that parallel and maintaining open access.
Great. Well, I don't have any further questions. Commissioner Murphy, Deshmani, any final questions before we move on? Okay. Chris, Andrew, anything else?
I think we're good for right now.
Okay, well, thank you for the update. We sounds like everyone's going to be very busy. Let's move on to 5B under old business, discuss climate resilience policy. Who's going to be leading that?
I guess I should lead that, unless Chris, you had something.
Well, I was going to suggest that probably the appropriate place for this is in our next strategic plan as part of that.
Okay.
To develop a climate policy. I think that's really where it fits in because it'll drive a lot of stuff that we do strategically.
Thank you for that, Chris. So what Ann sent a very helpful email to the commissioners after our last meeting. And we have an index at the PUD of documents that we pass, that we approve, that relate to policy. And looking at that index, it really made clear to me is that most of the things that we've approved as a commission, in terms of commission policy, have been driven by kind of regulatory requirements as they evolve. We don't have in that list of documents anything that kind of states values or kind of mission of the organization. And for that reason, I very much think also that, at least at the present time, the way to address the subject of resilience at the PUD would be best handled through a strategic plan update and state some of our motivations as a commission in the content of the strategic planning exercise. But I want to hear, since I brought the subject up, I want to make sure that this makes sense to the commission.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. And in our the strategic initiatives that we did last year to prepare for the general manager search, we had a sort of similar discussion a year ago that this is a priority for, I think, all three of us. And we wanted to have that expressed in those strategic initiatives in some way. And we did, but it wasn't one of the formal initiatives. So yeah, I think that we should talk about this in whether it's part of our goals or, I know Jim Darling is on right now. So maybe when we move into the strategic initiatives review, he can talk. I know he's planning to kind of walk us through what the rest of the process is like. And I think we should discuss how this fits into that. And I do also, Andrew, after our last meeting, shared a kind of a greenhouse gas emissions reduction policy that he used in the past with another jurisdiction. that can be helpful with some of our grant applications that we're looking at, because some of those state agencies want to see that. So I would also just say that if that is helpful for the grants that we're applying for this spring, let's not have that be a place where we lose points because we delay. I think maybe we could adopt that as an interim policy since we know we're going to be applying for a lot of these grants in the next few months. So Andrew and Chris, just keep us posted on the value of that. But yeah, I think moving this discussion into the strategic plan discussion makes sense. Mike, did you want to say anything?
I don't have anything, Christine.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to our strategic
Okay.
meeting. So
should we move on to new business then? And then I know Jim is on, so I think he can jot this down. And we can circle back to this. Does that all sound good to everybody? Great, getting head nods. So let's move on to new business. Our first item is to approve amendment to work order number 1 with Wilson Engineering. And that looks like Steve might be taking it.
I will, Commissioners. Good morning. And I'll be quick on this. This is a correction, if you would. Back in 2020, almost 2 years to date, you, the Commissioners, approved a contract with Wilson Engineering. That was in conjunction with approving work with Dave Olson to complete the update to our water system plan. And between that time, at that time, we approved the contract and also approved the task order or work order, as we called it in that contract, in an amount of just a little over $63,000. And that was not to exceed without formal approval by the general manager. Between then and February of this year, we completed the plan, but there was about a year, almost a year, that we took off in terms of completing the connection to Healthy Pet to help us prepare for the completion of the water system plan. So we ended up occurring more work by Wilson Engineering and Dave Olson to complete the plan. And at a point last fall in 2021, we actually exceeded that $63,075. At the time, myself and Kurt at Wilson Engineering had some discussions about the need to actually update or increase the amount of dollars in the work order. And I simply failed to follow through, not intentionally at all, but failed to follow through to get the update or the increase in the dollar amount for that work order. So Kurt and I have had several discussions about how to handle this, and what we agreed to was that we would ask for your approval of an additional $7,088.76, which took us through the Wilson Engineering billing up through January of this year. And then there was going to be additional dollars that Wilson would be billing us for in February, and with just some very few minor changes that are required now to meet Department of Health requirements, they'll be spending a few more dollars. They've agreed not to charge us for those dollars beyond the $7,088.76. So this is a correction, if you would, to get the work order amended and increased to make sure that when our folks from the state auditors come in this fall, that we won't find ourselves contrary to following purchasing policies. So that's the request. This is really my failure to ask for the update and increase in the work order and really ties it all together. So this is a request to increase the dollar amount for that work order by $7,088.76. Questions?
I will entertain a motion if we do not have any questions.
I will make a motion to approve the contract amendment, which is a correction. One, to assure that the money the PUD pays Wilson follows the work order number 1.
I'll second that. Approving
There-
amendment.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. The
Thank you.
motion carries. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to strategic initiatives review with Jim Darling. So Jim, are you there?
He's there, but he's on mute.
Jim, can you hear us? Maybe he stepped away for a second. Does anyone, I'm gonna maybe give him a call here. See. Jim, if you're there, let us know. Okay.
I have a question while we're waiting for Jim. Maybe I'll ask Ann. Ann? Have we ever put the strategic plan on that index of policies? And is that the kind of thing that fits into that index, or do you think that that's something that's not really an official policy or procedure?
Well, I just didn't add it to the list. No particular reason. I mean, it can be added. This was just more of a list of our policies and procedures.
What are the thoughts, Chris? What do you think about that? Is this a plan, or Steve?
Jim's on it.
Yeah.
Jim's with us.
Great. Yeah, we'll
So-
talk about it.
Okay.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, sorry about that. My phone rang. I had to tell him I couldn't talk. So,
No problem. Well, welcome. It is your portion of the agenda. So I'm going to let you kick it off.
okay. Thank you. And as I've got a PowerPoint to just to help guide our conversation this morning. So as you know, I completed my research, and I have sent to the commission and to Chris the kind of the results of that, where we prioritized a whole number of things. And my takeaway from all of that is that there's pretty good alignment on the commission about direction and the specifics of that direction. My other takeaway is it's a lot. So it's a matter of trying to balance resources with priorities in going forward. And the third thing I'd share with you is that when we originally talked along quite a while ago, we were targeting mid-July to complete a strategic update. And when I show you the PowerPoint here, I've got a timeline that in fact does that. So we can get it done. It's pretty aggressive, but I think we can get it done. And I also took into account in that scheduling, which you'll see that there might be some absences during the period of critical players. So I've kind of worked around that, but I think it works. So I'll go through that in some detail. So, and the other thing I wanted to share with you before we jump into the PowerPoint is that I would caution everyone not to spend too much or be too concerned about wordsmithing at this point. If there's something of substance that changes the intent of a statement or a goal, as we're going to see in a minute, that's great. But would be plenty of time for wordsmithing later on and fine tuning things. So it's always a cautionary note. So Commissioner, would you like me to go ahead and do the presentation now?
Yeah, why don't you do that? And also, I just realized I was remiss in introducing you. And I think that for the benefit of the general public, I do just want everyone to know that Jim Darling is a consultant with Leeward Strategies, and he has helped the PUD in the past. He actually helped us last year with our strategic initiatives as we prepared a job description for our general manager search. So he's quite in tune with the goals of the PUD, and it spent many years of his career in Whatcom County. So Jim is supporting us with our strategic planning this year. So just for most of us know you, Jim, but I want to make sure that those of us joining from the public know who you are. So yeah, please share your screen and let's get started.
So can you see that?
No.
You can still hear me though.
Yes.
I wonder why. Just give me a sec here. Okay, let me try that again. Can you see that?
That looks, there we go. Yes.
Yep.
Sorry about that. I missed a step. Now you can still see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. And just, I think for the folks in attendance from the community and the public, is that, my job is more of a guide to help. The PUD has all the answers. You know where you want to go. You've got all the background on it. My job is to guide you to an aligned decision. So what I thought today, and please, if we're going through this, I'll pause for some discussion, and a lot of it will take that, but please feel free to interrupt me. Today, I want to talk about the overall timeline. I just mentioned it a little bit, to complete the strategic plan update by July. I wanted to review the preliminary goals and priorities and talk about needed resources, which is the work that I sent to you, and I believe it's in your packets. And then to spend a few minutes towards the end, if we have time, to talk about strategic plan structure and terms, just so we're all on the same sheet of music, so to speak. And some of that you've seen before, and we can move through that pretty quickly. So in laying out the timeline to go forward, I worked backwards from approving the plan on your July 12th commission meeting, and hopefully I got your dates correct, and approving that final plan, and backing up from that on June 28th, there'd be a final plan review and any last minute tweaks. And then to get to that June 28th review by the commission, I think there are need for three dates or three meetings like this. One is obviously today. And today we wanted to talk about the preliminary goals and priorities, the structure of the strategic plan, the timeline, and some of the terminology. And then looking forward to April 12th, if it works on the commission agenda, to really have the refined goal discussion. And I'm going to point out that a lot of the goals that I have forward to you that we picked up in the research a lot of those are external goals, kind of they're outward facing. And there's going to be some internal goals like financial, personnel, those kinds of things that we'll have to develop. And then on the 12th, we'd be prepared to start discussing the mission statement, the values, and the vision statement for the PUD. Then we have a pretty significant gap in there because there's work from staff for staff to be done until we get to June 14th. And we do have some planned time off in that period, both for key folks at the PUD and actually for myself too. But there'll be plenty of work to do behind the scenes, and then get to a June 14th, probably the most significant study session we would have on reviewing strategies and tactics, a little bit more granular, confirming the mission, values, and vision at that time, reviewing the plan outline, and I'll have a little bit more on that in a minute. So overall, I'm thinking a meeting in early April, meeting in early June, and then be prepared to review and then approve the plan by July 12th, if that makes sense to the commission staff. I also prepared a little bit more detailed flow chart in terms of what would happen. So today, as I mentioned, March 22nd, talk about the preliminary goals and priorities. I think at this point, we need to turn to the staff's wisdom and assessment of that to say between now and April 12th to take a look at those and say, yeah, that's not realistic, or we need additional resources, be it money or personnel, or perhaps we can move things schedule-wise when the expected completion is, and to come back and on the 12th of April, have another session where we refine the goals, and also in that time period, identify some of the internal goals, as I mentioned earlier, they're not in the list that you have now. Then move on, talk about mission, values, and vision. You will see in a minute that the PUD has a really strong strong list and commitment to values. I think that are really well done. I think we need to review those, but they're pretty strong. The mission statement of the PUD we did a few years ago, we updated it, and I think once we know and have a more detailed discussion about goals and priorities, then I always like to do the mission after having that discussion. It's kind of counterintuitive, but it seems to work better in a group discussion. And then review a vision. And right now the PUD has some vision statements, but they're sort of buried in the strategic plan, and decide whether or not we need to have a more clear and articulated vision statement. And a little bit later in the presentation, we'll talk about, so what do they look like? So coming out of April 12th, then I think that there'll be some staff work to do over the next 60 days to refine the resources needed and really refine those strategies and detailed tactics. And then all of that leading up to the June 14th meeting, where we start to confirm things. And at that point too, that we need to add those things to the strategic plan that are, I call them background material. They're really not, they're very important, but they kind of round out telling the story. You know, it's on your current strategic plan has done a good job of that, the history, photos, et cetera. And then move on to the completion, and probably not look at the final plan design and layout. This is the graphic piece of it until June, and get that completed over the next 30 or 40 days, because it is a very strong communication piece, and your current layout is really great. In the past, the PUD has undertaken that. I'm prepared to do that. I have a subcontractor who does graphic layout and do a nice job, but we can talk about that later. And all of this leads up to approving the plan in mid-July. You can still then impact your budget considerations for fiscal year 2023. It's still not too late to do that. So that's all kind of driving the schedule. So at this point, let me hesitate for a second on the schedule, and I will end with this slide as well when we get through everything else in the discussion today, just to recap where we are. Is that schedule make sense to the commission and Chris, to the staff? Is it doable? You know, we could have special meetings of the commission, but I know time is valuable. So I think doing these as during your regularly scheduled meetings, I think makes sense.
So Jim, just my thoughts on this thing. The timeline you've laid out is aggressive, and
Is.
you know, and I view it as aggressive through the lens of, you know, what's it going to take to get a really good strategic plan, get buy-in, and all of that. That just takes a little bit of time. So I thank you for putting this together. I think it does give us a good roadmap to get a quality strategic plan in place for the future. And it's not that the one we have today is a bad plan. I'm not saying that, but it's time to build on that and take a fresh look. And I think this plan allows us to do that.
And Chris, I agree with that. And you know, the other thing to keep in mind is that, you know, strategic planning like this is a sort of a cultural thing within an organization like the PUD. And the plan's only going to get better and updated as you go forward into the future, as you learn more. So I always think these strategic plans are a work in progress, so to speak. So it's not we do it once, it's on the shelf, and then we got a plan, but it's a live document that you'll come back and visit next year for sure. Okay. So,
I want to talk to you about the timing, Jim.
Yeah.
Jim, is this a good time?
sure, absolutely. Yeah, this is the time.
So are there any constraints to this timing? Meaning, if things go longer or end up, you know, discussions lead to other things that end up requiring additional time. Does anybody feel on the commission or among staff any constraints regarding timing on this? I mean, I like the fact that you've laid out an aggressive plan because it says that we got to get some work done, which is good. But is there any constraints on this timing that we know of?
Well, there is the
perspective,
practical constraint that we really want to get this as a guide for how we budget, because your budgets really are how you implement your strategic plan.
Yep.
And so that's the consideration. However, I will point out that we can, if it's 80 or 90%, if it's near final, we could always use it to guide the budgets and push it out a little bit. But I'd want to see a reason why we'd want to delay, and then recognize that we would still want to try and use the interim product even if we're not done.
Okay, yeah.
And I think it puts, I think the stress point, quite frankly, is on the staff in this period between March 22nd and April 12th to look at resources. And then again, between April 12th and June 14th, I don't, there's a lot in here and you're asking a lot of the staff to do. Can they do it? I think absolutely, but it'll take an effort. So, and if it's, as Chris said, if it slides, it slides a little bit. I mean, but you're going to know generally where you are and be able to inform your budget process, even if it means additional fine tuning a little bit later. So.
Well, and Mike, was that you?
You go ahead, Ann. I'll follow. Excuse me, Ann. I'm Christine. You go ahead, Christine.
No problem. Jim, I think too, something you and I talked about is I think setting these goals and priorities, which we're about to get into, is such a big part of the work. And so, we've I think we're further along than we realize. And I think setting aggressive deadlines kind of helps keep all of us focused. And I know that there's interest in the community in seeing an updated strategic plan, with sooner rather than later. So, and I also recognize that this is going to change, and it is will be a living document. But this is an opportunity for us to really communicate as an organization. So we want it to be good. So I like the schedule as it currently stands. So I wanted to share that. Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I guess I would like to rely on Chris for this, because being in a position where I worked for a board, and the board would come up with ideas because that's what their job was. And then they'd pass it on to me and say, Mike, get the work done. And I could spend 40 hours on one of the projects they gave me, with staff included, my staff, only to find out that, well, it wasn't a high priority, and they kind of pushed it off to the side and was on something else. What I'm trying to say is, from a commissioner's point of view, I hope that we give the proper time needed for staff to accomplish these goals within reason. They already have other things to do besides. This is additional work added to them. So I just hope that we separate the priorities followed by goals, and the budget and staff is everything. So we're not going to accomplish much. Chris, you tell me if I'm wrong on that.
No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, the whole point behind this exercise is getting you three commissioners and staff aligned on what it is that we want this utility to be in the future. And, the first thing we have to do is articulate that. And that's really what the creation of the strategic plan is all about. And once we've articulated it, then it's on staff to say, okay, here's the priority of things that we've got in here. And here's what it's going to take to do it, both in personnel and in money and in time, and get that back to you, and then look at it. And that may change the priorities.
Yep.
For instance, one particular thing in here that I could point to is going to require a consulting contract that will be significant, and it will take some time. And, that's one of those things where the three of you may look at that and go, well, I get that. It's important enough we need to make this investment, or we get that, and it's important enough we need to do it right. We're going to have to push that off a little while till we can secure funding. So those are the discussions we have to have, and some of that will happen a little bit today, but far more on the 12th. I think that's what Jim was leading us towards. Is at that point, that's where we come back and say, okay, we've kind of scoped everything, given the prioritization. Here's what that looks like. Does that change the prioritization? Or do we proceed?
Chris, I think that's absolutely correct. The 12th is an important date for that reason. And between now and then, if we allocated 8 months for the staff to review this, they would have time, they would do it. But doing it in 3 weeks requires that the staff too takes a pretty high level perspective and use their best judgment in identifying resources and the reality of getting this done. So it's a lot, but I think it's doable, and it'll keep pace, keep us on target. So unless there's anything else, I'll move on to the next piece, which is talking about the strategic goals that you have in front of you. And just as a little bit of a reminder, and you've heard me say this before, I know you'll get tired of me saying it, but goals describe a destination, not an effort. You've heard me say this before, I always use the analogy is that John Sitkin and I decided to go to Chicago. Getting to Chicago is the goal. Heading east is not a goal. It's getting to Chicago. So keep that in mind as we go through this, and we still need some wordsmithing to do. Goals are typically quantified, they're measurable, and they have a timing component, but they're also realistic and achievable. And typically, there's not a hard rule about this, but typically goals are in the 3 to 5 year timeline to succeed. And as I mentioned earlier, they're both internal and external. So we did the research, and there were 11 initial goals or initiatives or priorities for the PUD that we discovered over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Some of these are carryovers from previous work we did, and carryover from the work we did when you were starting your recruitment for Chris's position. So I listed these in the order that with my assessment that were priorities for the commission as a whole. I only put strategic plan first just because I know the staff has been asking for a long time. We got to have more direction. The commission wants to give direction, so it's an important thing. But in terms of that's almost an internal thing to some extent. But in terms of the substance issues, the broadband strategy was very high. At the same time, and it's hard to delineate 2 versus 3 and 6 versus 5, but because they're all top priorities. Customer service with your current local industries is a very high priority for the PUD. And just like that, continue to provide water association technical support. You have a contract to do that was highly ranked. And just as important, of course, are the local water resources, which is essentially the water rights issue, is up there. And then defining the role of the PUD in advancing clean and renewable local energy. These 6 were the ones that, to me, kind of jumped off the page as being a very top priority. And you could rearrange the order of these. It's just it's hard to differentiate them. And then these are all preliminary, of course. And then very important as well was community outreach. Well, it sounds like it's an outward facing thing. It's really inward about how it's the social media and the website and the logo and all that kind of stuff. Advancing clean industry in Whatcom County is actually both an environmental and a economic development play. Water supply, there's been an interest of using funding from the state to demonstrate the feasibility of providing water supply to those in need. And then two other ones was identifying opportunities for the PUD to be a resource about utility issues, water issues, power issues. And then finally, it was my suggestion, and it's a important but relatively minor thing to undertake, is I would recommend the PUD that you periodically, whether it's this year or next year, you do a community impact analysis of the impact the PUD has on the community, because it has a lot, and it's good to do that periodically. And we can come back to these in a second, but let me show you the one more graphic that I provided to you. And this is a huge amount of detail, but it's really, I think, the document that Chris would go back with the staff and look at and say, does this timing make sense? If those 11 priorities were important for the commission, does this timing make sense when we might accomplish these? Some of them which will be done this year, some of them next year. And can we attach a out-of-pocket budget expense to some of these? As Chris mentioned, there may be consulting agreements you need to do or studies to undertake. The one thing I did do, which is in the lower left there were a few things that are water-related issues, and Mr. Jilk has a contract with you for a while. He's got an incredible wealth of information. And so I thought that some of those things might be good to undertake while Steve is still on duty, so to speak. And so I don't know that represents a priority, other than you've got the skill and knowledge with Steve to do those while he's still on call for the PUD. So I stuck the Water Association contacts, emergency shortfall report on water, and a memorandum on low water flow solutions in that time frame. The rest of them, I think, generally reflect what I heard in my research from the PUD about timing. And I've also generally listed them from top to bottom on this chart to follow that 1 through 11 priority that you just saw a minute ago. So any questions on this? I don't know how you'd like to proceed. We can go back and talk about these 11 if you would like. I think getting into this detail of timing, I think would be good for the staff to hear if you already know of any general concerns, but also I think the staff needs to have an opportunity to go back and put dollars on these and staff time and see if the scheduling changes, and use this as their playbook, so to speak, to work off of. But any questions on the priority or comments about the goals, the 11 so far?
I'd like to have a little bit more time to, I have some kind of maybe minor comments, and is it okay if I get those comments out to you, Jim, in the next day or so?
Oh, sure. And
At the high level, I reviewed this, and of course we had our meeting and I'm on board, but some minor clarifications.
And also too, Commissioner, that whole issue of wordsmithing too, that will kind of happen as we go through this process, but so any other comments from the commission about?
But yeah, this looks good to me is what I guess main things to say.
Yeah, okay.
Could you throw up that next slide just so I look at, yeah, thank you. Just
and also too, that accompany this, and I didn't put it up on the screen, but we also put together a list of strategies and some success measurements that really put the detail to this, but the commission also has a table of that as well. And that slide of the little Gantt chart there reflects all that much more granular detail. So, and I will tell you, it's every organization has this, that everything is important, right? So it's I almost hesitated sometimes to put numbers on them, but it's easier to identify them in conversation. But but I will tell you that this is an aggressive, having done this for a long time, this is an aggressive, big agenda, but it's also very specific direction to the staff. So
I would say, I mean, obviously we've all had quite a bit of time to review the goals, strategies, and success measures, and I provided some edits to you and all that. So I'm also on board. I would say that if there were one of these goals that I had to, take off the list, I think it would be number 10, the PUD as a resource. Not that I don't want the PUD to be a resource, but I just think that when you drill down into the two strategies that we have, I mean, one of them is just conduct community dialogue with cities on their need for PUD engagement. And frankly, I think we're already doing that every single week based on, what I'm seeing, through my interactions with Chris. So, and in some ways, I think that the first measure, the measure for how we're going to do that, is really part of the strategic planning process, that, Chris, in partnership with the commissioners, is going to be reaching out to different key stakeholders in the community, many of whom represent cities. And then, I mean, I think in terms of developing a utility education program, PUD internships, scholarships, I mean, that's something that I care a lot about, just, with my work in education. So it's certainly not something that I don't think is important. And I think the utility industry is really struggling right now to, you know, we need more, we need a pipeline of trained workers to come into the utility industry. So I think it's really important. But I also wonder if we have the bandwidth to do it on top of all of these other strategies. And whether that's maybe something that the commissioners could be working with WPUDA on. I've talked to George Kahn about the need to get more young people prepared to work in utility industry. And so, you know, again, it's not that I don't think that it's important. It's that I think, you know, I said this to either Chris or Jim, but I think, you know, when you have too many priorities, you have no priorities. So I do think if there's ways that we can, I think this prioritization exercise is really important. So I wanted to just share that. To me, that's the one that would fall off the list, in my opinion. I don't know if other commissioners have similar or reactions to that.
And Commission, just so you know, I think we included that if you look on this chart, I think you can see can you see my cursor?
Yeah, we can see your cursor.
Yeah, I never know. That was, you know, low end on priority because I sensed that as well, and out in 2023. So that's where we ended that one rested. Yeah. And Chris, I will send you the original. This is in PowerPoint format, and I will send you, make sure you have the Word document of the more detailed table with all, just so you've got all that in something that's more pliable for you to use.
I actually do have that. Thank you. You sent it to me, I don't know, a week ago.
Okay, good.
And for members of the public, that is in our agenda packet, which is available on the website if you want to take a look at it.
So
Jim, just to kind of go on a little bit about what Christine just said, when I'm looking at 10, and it's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart for lots of reasons, but it is really something that describes an activity, not a destination.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, and you're right. As I was looking at the reviewing these this morning, getting ready, I thought, well, Jim, you're not following your own guidance here. So we may need to wordsmith some of these as well and change as a destination. You're right.
But I think that one really does describe an activity, and you know, I appreciate that Commissioner Grant feels strongly about that. I do too. But that's probably something that we're going to act on regardless, and try and carry that forward. So I'm not sure it needs a place in the strategic plan.
Okay. So with that in mind, then just to summarize, then after today, the next step would be to for us to reconvene on April 12th at your meeting and hear back from staff on these. In the interim, Chris, I may contact you about other internal goals that you have in mind that are not on this list, you know, like financial, personnel, whatever those are.
Yeah.
And then we'll be prepared to start talking about mission, values, and vision at the meeting on the 12th. So
I have I don't know if this is, it's like, are you done with your presentation yet, Jim, or?
I want to go over the structure of a plan, kind of traditional. It's about 6 slides, maybe. I'd like to do that. And I can do that quickly, but.
Yeah, okay. So I've got comments, but I'd like to reserve them till the end.
Okay. Let me just go through this quickly. And I think, you know, this is, a lot of you have seen this before, and I just wanted to maybe for the audience as well, but there's no right or wrong about structures of strategic plan. There's no right or wrong about terminology. I'll just give you this food for thought to consider. I do feel pretty strongly that local planning for local government, it's really finding true alignment on multi-year priorities. It's not an easy task. It also means embracing them, both the commission and staff, to move them forward. And what it really is, it's really a link from today to the future. It's like you're trying to define and shape the future. So that's why it's important. I always ask people to consider the why first, then the what, and then how you're going to do it. And in all my experience working with local governments and not-for-profits, people tend to want to jump to the what. And I just ask, as you think about things strategically, you always keep in mind the why you're doing this. The what's really important, and the how is critical, obviously, but why, don't overlook the why. So when we look at the strategic, the architecture of a strategic plan, this is pretty traditional. People do these things different. Some people call goals objectives, priorities. But this generally, without going into too much detail, gives you a sense that if your mission, vision, and values should have a long shelf life. If you're changing your mission every 2 years, the organization's in trouble. Particularly a public institution like the PUD. Goals tend to be in the 3 to 5. There's nothing's been concrete about this, but tend to be in the 3 to 5 year period. And strategies are the next 1, 2, 3 years, and tactics are in the next year or so. A lot of public organizations are then going to an annual action plan where the strategic plan has a shelf life of a few years, and managers and directors have different names for these, and they do them differently, but they're essentially an implementation plan, how it's going to happen, and I'll show you that in a minute. So what's the vision? Well, in my book, it's what the future looks like when you're successful. The mission is why the PUD exists and its role in the community. Values is how you're going to do your work. The what and goals or focus areas is what you're going to accomplish. Strategies are the routes you're going to take to get to your goal, and tactics are the detail that energize the strategies. This is pretty conventional strategic planning. The vision statement is optional. I know I've heard an expression that you'd like to have a vision statement. I think it's great. A lot of organizations don't do that. My experience has been that the mission statement is the most overlooked thing when people do these. And then the other thing that doesn't work sometimes very well is that the goals, and as Chris pointed out, the need for a destination specifically are often too vague. And I spent my whole career in the public sector, and the public sector tends to talk about effort in goals and not accomplishment. I've been guilty of that myself. We're going to try to make, to be more financially solvent. Well, it's really being financially solvent, not effort. So I'll do these quickly. The vision statement is optional, as I mentioned. It's determined by the commission with staff input. I've given you some ideas here on some vision statements. Some of them are really great if you read through those. The last one I kind of like in blue there, a just world without poverty. This is a not-for-profit. It's Oxfam that works on poverty issues around the world. The one in red at the bottom, it just tells a quick story that the United Kingdom's nuclear vision statement is 58 pages long, and it needed an executive summary. And I thought it was a little bit odd that your vision statement's too long if you need an executive summary for it. So, and the PUD does not currently have a stated vision. Now it's implied and buried in some of your documents, your strategic plans, but it doesn't, I don't think, jumps off the page if you decide you want one, like it should. Mission statements are why the PUD exists. And I've included 3 ones in blue there that I think are really great. My favorite is the Alzheimer's not-for-profit, which is a world without Alzheimer's disease. Pretty straightforward. That's both their vision and mission. The one in red is, I think, a bad mission statement. It's actually from a very prominent art museum in the United States, a national museum. it's just hard to communicate. It doesn't, to me, it just doesn't make sense. I think simpler, shorter is better. I have put in green there what the current PUD's mission statement is. And it's something that we'll start from there when we start talking about mission and work from that. Once again, this is determined by the commission with a lot of staff input. Values are how the PUD undertakes its work, and typically values are what do we value and who do we value? You know, we value customers, the public. What do we value? The environment, safety. You have in your strategic plan 2 sets of values. One are internal cultural values, and the other one are outcome values. And you should review these over the next month or so. You know, they're pretty good. And I know the PUD spent a lot of time on these when we did the original plan. And I just want to point out on the outcome values down there by vision, that's not the vision statement. That's, we need to have vision. We value having vision when we do things. So take a review of these, and I'll give this PowerPoint to Anne so she can distribute it. And then goals, we talked about this a little bit. They're both internal facing and external facing. A lot of the ones we talked about today so far, the preliminary ones are, they're generally external facing, but organizations, and I know Chris will want to have some internal facing goals about how the place is running. In your current strategic plan, we have 6 foundational goals and there are 8 initiatives. And my recommendation is that the new plan has just goals and not confuse them with initiatives. But at the time we did it, it made sense. Strategies, I don't think you currently have formal strategies adopted. I've given you some examples here. I really, tell you the truth, I couldn't find any bad examples of strategies. You know, the one at the bottom, I think is a really good example of a strategy. I pulled it from a Port Authority strategic plan about developing a proactive 10 to 20 year repair and replacement plan for assets. I think that's really good. And this is really a strong collaboration of staff and commission. It's generally advanced by staff with obviously the commission agreeing to the strategies because they define how you're going to go do your work. And then I mentioned before about this action plan or implementation plan and what tactics are. And this is just a fictional example of, I've seen some action plans that's largely staff driven. It's a staff piece of work. It's done annually. It accompanies the budget. It's, you know, and Chris may have his own style of how to do this. And this is just an example. But this is one about implementing that proactive asset repair and replacement plan, the strategy. And then this one lists 4 tactics. We've come up with some interesting leads. And typically these action or implementation plans will have who in the staff's responsible and what's the timeline and what do they need for resources. So a little bit of food for thought. So just to remind you again, this is typically, and we can have some discussion at our next meeting about, is this the structure we want? Do we want to use different terminology? But we should all have agreement, when I say we, the commission and staff, on what terms we want to use. And like I said, there's no right or wrong example for that. And then discuss whether or not you want an annual, or actually if Chris wants an annual action plan or implementation plan, that's something to give some thought to. So just as the last slide, that's our schedule with the goal of getting this done by July the 12th. And as I mentioned in that gray box at the bottom, we probably shouldn't start working on the actual layout until early June and get that completed, right, either by July 12th or shortly thereafter. And that's really the plan as a communication piece. So, and the plan you have now is it's got a good look to it. It's easy to read for people. So, and you also got to think about, as we talk about plan, design, and layout, who the target audience is. It's obviously internal, but I'm guessing that the PUD has used their plan, and you'll use this one as a communication piece to an external audience. So there you go. That's my presentation. I hope we didn't run through time too much.
We're doing fine on time.
Okay. Any comments on it?
So, firstly, I think it's important to say that there's no shortage of gurus on organizational development and planning and strategic plans, and they all have slightly different definitions of these terms.
Yep.
And so it seems to me that what we maybe should focus on are the questions that we want to answer in this process, rather a little bit less on what we label it. Meaning there's a series of questions that you listed, for example, under mission, vision, and goals. I would like to submit to the commission that let's focus on the questions we want to answer, and rather than deciding whether we're calling this a vision statement, this a mission statement, or so on and so forth. The reason is because the kind of input you get when you start off with a label is different than the kind of input when you start with an open question. And it's the input that comes from the open question from the various stakeholders that matters. Let's wait till the end to collate the input we get in the process into labels, just for the purpose of organization in carrying the work forward and having it to be a useful document to all of us, to all the stakeholders.
Yeah,
Does that make sense to everyone?
yeah, and typically, like, let me give you I think you're spot on with that. Like on the mission statement, you know, the big question is, why do you exist? What's your role in the community? And what I like to do is when we have those discussions, you're absolutely right. I start with questions too. And the big question with values is, what do you value, and get a list of them without starting to write down what the value statement is, and who do you value, those kinds of things. So I think that makes sense. Yep.
So the another high level thought I have, and like I said, there's some minor things that I'll follow up with you about later, but they're technicality type things. But at the highest level, I want to talk now a little bit about stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? I'd like to ask the commission, who do we see are there stakeholders in the strategic planning process? Of course, it's the commission. Of course, it's the staff. But who are the other stakeholders? Are customers a stakeholder? Is the general public a stakeholder? Well, if customers are a stakeholder and the general public is a stakeholder, how are we factoring in their needs and wants into the strategic planning process? I'd like to hear from others.
I think that our customers are definitely stakeholders, and so is the general public. I think the challenge is getting input from those stakeholders. And I mean, one of the things that I really liked about the customer service goal is that the way that we're planning to measure success is by, creating a survey to give to our customers to really engage them in how we can improve. So that would not inform the strategic plan, but I think that that's a really good step in preparing our organization to better facilitate feedback from that really critical group of stakeholders, our current customers. So, you know, I know some of our customers come to our public meetings and, but, you know, maybe we could be more intentional about letting them know about this process. As far as the general public being our stakeholders, yeah, I mean, I think I've certainly tried to let people know that we're doing strategic planning, but it's, you know, it's difficult. Chris, you had some ideas about how to increase engagement in this process. Do you want to, and you shared those with me during a check-in that we had. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. What I'd like to do in this process is have a couple of open meetings where we invite, you know, first and foremost, the folks that are on this call today, because we know that those are members of the public that are engaged, whether they're customers or just members of the public or both. So there's a small group of people who always step forward and say, you know, I'm interested in what you guys are doing. But we need to go out to a broader audience. So what I wanted to do was ping all of our customers and then invite the, you know, like we have contacts on Bellingham City Council, obviously on the Whatcom County Commission with Sat Paul and staff. We know folks at Linden, we know folks at Blaine, we know folks at Birch Bay. So, you know, folks at Ferndale. So invite all of them in. So have one where we invite just everybody, anybody who wants to show up and get their input. And then a second more targeted one where we reach out to folks and say, look, we're going through a strategic planning process. If you want to help us, here would be a time when you could do that. Here's the material we're looking at, and here's the date we have in mind. So I hadn't really fleshed it out beyond that because really it required the input of both staff and the commission to move that forward. But I think that's where we are today. So
Yeah.
Christine, does that summarize kind of what we talked about?
Yeah, and I think that would be a good pathway forward.
I'm curious if Commissioner Murphy or Jim Darling has thoughts about this subject as well.
This strategic plan, Jim was there when we first started, of course, so was Steve. And we went down this road bringing Jim on board because we wanted to definitely build unity. And we really were not serving our community at a time. And the strategic plan helped us. We honestly, when we talk about the community, we serve the community because I hope this isn't taken wrong, but it's because the commissioners want to serve the community. I've had many times people come to me and say that my tax dollars are not being spent wisely in the PUD. And I let them talk, and then I have to inform them that the PUD does not take any taxes from Whatcom County. But we're here to serve you. So I like number 10 where it says PUD as a resource. I always looked at it as, you know, our job is bigger than serving just our customers, though our revenue comes from our customers. So our customers are extremely important. But we have reached out in what we felt comfortable with, which was water. And we started serving our community. And how can we help you come alongside? Not with dollars. We'll try to find it through grants and other ways, but not through tax dollars. So I don't know. I'm interested in seeing what the future holds with this new strategic planning. Keeping in mind, you know, that we're here to serve the community, but the community, I don't know how to say it properly, but they mean a lot to me. But at the same time, you know, we have our strategic planning might be a little different than what the community really wants.
So I have a follow-up. Jim, I wanted to make sure I heard from,
Yeah, let me.
Jim had his hand up. Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Jim.
But this is always an interesting discussion on these strategic plans. So my experience has been there's two schools of thought on it. One is you go through the whole planning process, you don't finalize it, but then you go out and go through a process of getting comments from stakeholders, including the general public on it before you adopt the plan. So that's one school of thought. And because then the community has something to react to, right? Rather than, I worked on strategic plans where it's the opposite of that, where from day one, there's a lot of input through open houses, and it's a much more timely process, or it takes a lot more time, I should say. But then part of the downside of that is the public doesn't have a lot to react to because it's a blank slate, right? So there's a hybrid model in between there that maybe would be appropriate here, and the schedule could accommodate it, is do what Chris suggested, inviting people to all these discussions. Obviously, they're open meetings, but maybe target that June 28th meeting to have a more robust, input at that meeting. People can participate all along, don't get me wrong, but at that point, you'll have something that's not finalized yet, but it'll have enough for folks to react to and get it on the website ahead of that meeting so people can make comments on it. So that's one idea, is do a hybrid, which I think, Chris, was kind of your model that you were describing is more along those lines. And I think that's totally workable on the schedule. I've done strategic plans with local governments that took over a year to do. And in one of them, there were a half a dozen open houses over a year. And it's a matter of time and of course cost with that. But this plan can do it if you let people know these meetings are going to happen, and then you really focus on something like June 28th to really get more earnest feedback, and then maybe ask people to make written comments before the June 28th meeting, before you make a decision.
so thank you, Jim. As follow-up, I think the ideal process is one, from my perspective. I'm going to speak from my perspective now. I asked the question first, but now I'm going to express some of my opinions on the subject. We are all a product of our experience. My experience, just to qualify, is working in strategic planning in the largest of corporations and also in startup companies, and then now being involved with it in the public sector. And I think my opinion is that customers are stakeholders in the strategic planning process. And my opinion is that Whatcom County citizens are also stakeholders. And there is established processes for quantifying what the wants of those stakeholders are. And unlike staff and commissioners who, in that we have a more intimate working relationship with the organization and its resources, that is not something which these other stakeholders have, that is customers and community members. However, there is a way to structurally incorporate their input to create some kind of standardized, simplistic intake form so that people who are customers or members of the community can provide a representation of what their wants are from the PUD. It's not terribly difficult to do, and it's something that can be done in relatively short time frame. So the ideal process is where we take these wants in the form of input up front, allow it to guide our process developing a strategic plan, and then have the opportunity for review in July timeframe. So those are my thoughts on this subject. And I think that, having worked on this in other environments, I could provide input, but I think there's plenty of capacity as well in the commission and the organization also. But this is what I think might be helpful, is the ability to capture wants from customers and from the public. And it could be done in a way that is also for those who would not like to be officially labeled, as such, in a non-specific name type of way. So that's my input. I'd like to hear what other people think.
So are you picturing a random survey for like a phone-based survey where we, reach out to a cross section of residents in order to get their feedback?
I'm not sure random would be, because, we don't have a reliable population that we've established a relationship. Once we have a social media presence, we'll be able to do those kinds of things. But I think having an intake form of some kind available, maybe on our website, and then directing people to complete the intake form, and having the intake form have the option of not disclosing the identity of the person, to maintain their privacy.
I think that would give us valuable information. I think most of the people that would participate are probably people that are already fairly engaged with the PUD in some way, rather than really getting, the fact of the matter is that I'd say, a fairly large portion of Whatcom County residents don't even know that the PUD exists. So I think if we just, kind of did if we hired a surveying firm or something like that to kind of get a statistically significant cross section of Whatcom County residents, that would probably have we'd see very different results than kind of, putting it on our website and using commission and staff contacts to get it out. I think both would be useful. And I think the more input, the better. So it's just, I think it's just, there's a lot of different ways that we could go about doing that. Chris, you unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to observe, I've been involved in strategic planning processes for 40 years in large and small organizations. And, what I have found to be least effective is just generalized fishing expeditions for information, because what you end up with is kind of the beauty contest. And that doesn't really help where you want to be in the long term. What I found to be effective is to engage kind of that coalition of the willing, those folks that we already know about us and have opinions. And really, I think those are the folks we want to reach out to, and leave the door open for anybody else who we're not aware of to kind of wander on in. For strategic planning, I've done these website surveys, and one analysis that I did, more than half of the input that we received was from people who are outside of the community completely. Just a point of reference. And it was kind of surprising. In fact, in one survey we did at one organization, there was an outside organization that wanted to drive a particular behavior. So they organized a letter writing campaign that was out of state. And we had hundreds of inputs from people that just really didn't have anything to do with us. So that was unfortunate. We just had to kind of set that aside. And then, kind of reacting to what Jim said, my intention was always to go out with some rough draft or an outline or something. Not just to say, hey, what do you think the utility should be in 20 years? We don't want to have that kind of wide open. I really believe people do need something to react to. And it's not to channel them, it's to give them some kind of an idea of what the expectations are. Because if they write to us and say, I want you to fix the crisis in Ukraine, they're going to be disappointed. If we tell them, fundamentally we're a water utility with a small electric footprint, and here's what we're trying to do for the future in Whatcom County, they can bound their expectations by that. So, and just one more thing, Jim, I've been involved in this stuff a lot, and I've heard at least a dozen professional strategic planning presentations. I got to say, this is by far the best. This is simple, it's straightforward, it's doable. It doesn't seem to miss anything. I mean, it just thank you. I know how we found you, and I'm glad we found you.
Well, thank you. It's easy to overcomplicate it, and you don't get as good a product. So I appreciate that. So we see eye to eye on that one, on the straightforwardness of it.
Mike Murphy has his hand up.
Thank you, Christine. Chris and commissioners, what I said earlier, I don't know how it was taken, and knowing me, I put my foot in my mouth because it always seems to be that way. But I want to serve the community. I do have a deep heart for the community. When people came and said that, schools are closed and my children couldn't be educated because my computer system, I didn't have one, I wanted to do everything possible. I'd rather have come right to you, all of us just write a check and say, here's your broadband, but it's taken us a long time, and I have no idea when we'll actually be hanging wire. When we had a drought and people said their wells were dry and they called, I wanted to go out and help them. And I was hoping that we could provide that drought emergency water, even though they may have to pay for trucking, the water be free, just to help our community people. But I don't want to mislead the community. I don't want to make promises. It's easy as a government agency to get caught in something because you want to help, but there's no way. So I don't want to make false promises. I want people to know that here's what we can do and here's what we can't do. But, there's short term and long term. Anyhow, that's it.
Thanks, Mike.
So, I'd like to follow up, but unless.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, we have, I think, an agreement in the commission that the input of customers and community members is important. We're just figure out how to incorporate that input. And I think there's differing opinions in the commission as it relates to how to effectively incorporate that input. That's something that we're going to continue to develop our understanding over time. If there isn't support for the idea of intake at this particular time in point in the process, and if the support is more for review of a plan after it's prepared, I'm fine with that. But I'm certainly going to make my level best attempt as the commissioner with the resources that I have to identify as much direct input on the wants of the community and customers. And so that's my personal statement. And just as always, my door is completely open to folks from the community in any capacity as customers or general community members to understand what their wants are.
And just to be clear, my position on this is not that I don't want input from the community or customers. It's just that, like the example Chris said, I certainly don't want to go to great effort to put a survey out and then have, large portion of the results be from individuals that aren't even within our county. So I just, and I think there's some, we have several more meetings that we have on the calendar here. And I think I was at a forum that the city of Bellingham did last night on climate. And, I know that was listed in the newspaper. And so we could do a better job of encouraging, public comment and review of our plan in some of those meetings, similar to kind of what we've seen from some other agencies that are going through different kind of planning processes. Chris?
I'll propose to bring a community communication plan back at our next meeting.
Okay.
Give you something to react to, because I think that's, my sense is we're all saying the same thing. We want engagement, we want it to be effective, we want it to be efficient. And what does that look like?
Great. I think that would be good.
Yeah, and so, and it's also important to say that there are many things in life that we want to do that are hard and that we have to work within our constraints. So certainly getting the highest fidelity input from the community, and all of the stakeholders here, in my use here of the term community, is hard. And many people have tried that in different ways, and everybody's failed, because we're never going to get a perfect representation of what all the different stakeholders have to offer. But we shouldn't let the fact that it's hard, or that sometimes our efforts aren't successful, stop us from continuing to pursue that goal. And so let's not make challenges with getting community input a substitute for getting community input.
Mm-hmm.
That's why that's not what we're discussing today, but I'm going to bring up this because makes it very clear to me how important it is that we develop a social media and community dialogue, because that would be very beneficial at this time to be able to capture some of this input that we would like.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got some work to do, and it's not over with the strategic plan in terms of increasing the fidelity of the organization to all these various sources of valuable input. That's okay.
I agree with you, Atul. And I think that, like I said, I think some of the things in our strategic plan are going to give us better community input, and then it will be sort of a virtuous cycle.
Right,
as we go
exactly.
Forward. So yeah. Well, we are actually getting somewhat close to our 90 minutes that we allotted for this conversation. And I want to make sure that we kind of can put a pin in this and are clear about what our next steps are. So we'd had, Jim, I don't know if you want to share your screen again with the next steps here, but we had April 12th as our next discussion on this. And so that means that the staff have a lot of work to do between now and April 12th. I think that, so Commissioner Deshmani, you said you had a few more edits to the goals, and so are those we have a little bit more time now. Did you want to get those out now and just share them, or would you prefer to do that one-on-one with Jim?
Yeah, it's just there's some technical points, and I'll do that with Jim, but I did have one more issue to raise today.
Okay, go ahead.
And that is what we talked about earlier in the agenda, which is resilience.
Right.
So what resilience is, it's like an intersection of two kinds of goals that are in our list so far. And because resilience is a combination of action to mitigate climate impacts, which clean energy does, producing energy in ways that produce less carbon, That's a mitigation action. And then there's adaptation actions, which basically are things like improving the nearshore environment, habitat along streams, water quality in streams, in the ocean, all of that. So what I'm trying to get at is that this is the subject of resilience hits on several of the goals. And I want to know if we should add it as its own thing, or maybe it's a potential way to consolidate one or more goal together. And I wanted to know what the commission thinks of that.
Jim, could you go back a few slides to the pyramid of components of the strategic plan? Yeah, that. Can you do it so the questions come up again? There were some, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Atul, when you look at these different components of a plan, where do you see resilience? What pops out to you?
Maybe a little bit in goals, but really resilience from my perspective shows up more in the long-term statements, values, missions, vision, and to some degree goals.
Yeah.
And of course, what Jim has laid out is a list of 11 goals for us to work with, but it could be show up as a value. It could show up, to some degree also as a goal, but because it impacts so many of the goals of our organization, maybe it should be like in the values, mission, and vision. I'd like to hear other thoughts.
I think for me, and this, I've only been thinking about this for a few seconds now, but to me, values is where it seems like that would go. And looking at our old strategic plan, I don't think that any of those are bad values on there, but I do think that this is the kind of thing where with every decision that we make, we incorporate this thinking, and so it's really about how we work.
Yeah, and I'll note that, and that's something we can discuss when we get to that vision. I was going to send out a little questionnaire to the commission and Chris about those questions, Commissioner, that you mentioned earlier, just to help people start shaping their thinking for the next meeting. So
Great.
We can include that. That'd be valuable.
Does that sound like a good pathway forward, Commissioner Deshmani?
Yeah, it does.
To address your, okay, thank you for bringing that up again.
Yeah, no, thank you.
So, I just want to make sure that so Jim and Commissioner Deshmani, you two will connect as soon as possible so that we can get the goals, strategies, and success measures to the staff, so they have the max, because they only have 2.5, I guess, a little more than 2.5 weeks to prepare, but still, we're asking them to get quite a lot done before the April 12th meeting. So, is there anything else, Commissioner Murphy, before we ship this over to the staff? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I have nothing else, Christine.
Okay. And so, so Jim and Commissioner Deshmani, you two will connect as soon as
Jim and I'll have a call if that's okay, Jim.
Sure, absolutely.
and then we'll get those over to the staff. And I'm assuming, we're not gonna, nothing you're proposing, Atul, will change the goals dramatically before we get it to the staff, right? Okay, perfect. So just some wordsmithing. Great. then I don't think, you know, unless there's major changes, that we need to go through a whole other review and approval process from the other commissioners. But Jim, why don't we just defer to you on that?
Yeah, it'll come back up in the meeting on April the 12th.
Right, right,
Yeah, we'll
okay,
fold it into that.
okay, okay, great.
And I'll send a note out to folks on commissioners to be thinking about before the 12th as well.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Well, I want to keep moving on our agenda then. So Jim, thank you so much for your support with this process. And we'll be hearing from you a lot over the next few months. So thanks. And
All
then,
right. Thank you.
okay, take care. So let's move on to the general manager report.
Commissioners, I've got four things to cover. I'm not going to say four quick things because I never know how it's going to turn out. First is, just want to give you an update. The public records requests that we're currently fulfilling, we're making progress on that, but it's not without cost. So I wanted to give you an update. We've spent $4,100 so far on that public records request for Mr. Humphreys. And I expect that that's certainly not the end of it. So even though, you know, it's going to be electronic copies, there's been a lot of staff time and kind of more to follow. So I'll keep you posted as we get close. And then once we send all the information over, I'll give you a final update on what the final costs were. John, do you have something?
Well, I was just going to add that I'm not sure if that 4,100 includes all the legal, because we're just getting started on the review of possible exemptions or what is a record of the PUD versus a personal record. So
No, those are staff costs, not legal costs.
So John, am I okay? Did I sent my emails, right? You confirmed that? Because I didn't get any responses.
we did receive those, and we're starting to work through everything we've received.
Good, good. I just wanted to make
If you
sure.
have any questions or clarifications, Ann or Allison in my office will follow up.
Being the procrastinator that I am, you know, I was a day late.
Well, let's just say for the record, there hasn't been any procrastination. Everyone's been diligent. We're trying to do our reasonable search as quickly as everyone can during the circumstances.
I mean, I was a day late to the time you told me. You said, "Oh, you got to have it to this day." I think it was like the following Monday or so.
All right. So
Thanks for cracking the whip, John.
You got it. Thank you, Ann.
So the second item, if there's no more discussion on that, I got a call from Northwest River Partners about 2 weeks ago. And last week I went through about an hour-long presentation with them. And they wanted to bring the presentation to you guys, to the commission. And I said, no, instead I'm going to go and talk to the commissioners. And I do have the slides if you guys want to go through all 26 slides, but the ask is simple and straightforward, and I think reasonable. And I am advocating that we answer the ask. So what the Northwest River Partners is focused on is they are in favor of maintaining the lower Snake River dams, not tearing them down. And I am as well. Those dams represent 3,000 megawatts of carbon-free capacity. They're not without environmental costs. I get that. But there is no plan to replace them. And all of us that buy power from Bonneville are going to see rates go up substantially if we take 10% of the average power out of the system and 3,000 megawatts of capacity out on peak. Bonneville last year at the end of the heat emergency acknowledged that those dams were responsible for not triggering rolling blackouts in the Northwest. When that heat wave hit, the supply was strained and there wasn't any more power to be had. So those dams were critical. The presentation that the Northwest River Partners put on largely focused on public opinion and the impact of all of the environmental groups spending on public opinion. And to the point where less than half of the public now believes that hydro is a renewable form of power. And that a bare majority of people view removing dams as an extreme position. So My view, removing dams is an extreme position. You've got to have a darn good reason to do that, or the dams have, it's possible they completely outlived their usefulness, need to be rebuilt or torn down, one or the other. These dams do not fall into that. So what the Northwest River Partners is asking for is a cash contribution to their effort to fight, to essentially get an advertising campaign going to save the Snake River dams. And they forwarded a list of who's contributed and how much it's been and all that. And several of the PUDs have contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I told them that even if we had a contribution, we would not make their top 10 list. So, my ask of you guys is that we look at a reasonable amount to contribute to this. And by reasonable, I'm thinking $1,500, $2,000, not a huge amount, but something that says that we believe that these dams are an important part of the energy future of the Northwest. And so with that, I'll throw it open to the three of you and get your input.
I'm certainly open to the dialogue on the Snake River dams. I certainly don't understand everything there is to understand about it, but certainly I wouldn't be in favor of any kind of contribution to an effort to communicate one way or another about the Snake River dams. And my biggest concern as far as Whatcom PUD is that we don't have skin in this particular game, and we should. There's a lot of adverse impacts from us taking a position with our very valuable tribal relationships, with our very valuable relationships in the community. We really don't have from my perspective, an oar in this particular struggle, but I'm certainly open to discussing it further.
Well, Commissioner, just to address that, we buy power from Bonneville. And to the extent that the Snake River dams help hold those costs down, we definitely have a dog in this fight. There's no doubt about that at all.
We might disagree.
I know that in the last Wapuda Energy meeting, George Kahn and Nicholas Garcia talked about, I believe, 2 different studies that are happening right now related to the Snake River dams and resource adequacy. And I could probably spend a year researching this topic and still not know everything, but I would certainly like to learn more about the issue before we make a financial contribution to the Northwest River Partners at this time. I would be interested if you can forward their PowerPoint presentation. I would be interested in taking a look at that. This is the first time I've ever heard about them as an organization. So I'm certainly still in the learning phase on this particular policy.
Me
topic.
too. Yeah, I'd love to see it. Yeah.
Okay, I can forward that off. If we can move on, the third thing I want to talk about is Cherry Point. There's been a need for an overarching economic development plan for Cherry Point for a long time. And I know Steve participated in earlier versions of it. There are versions of it to go back to 1998. But I've been working with Don Goldberg just a little bit, and just want to let you guys know that there's an interest in us getting together with the port, with the county, and with some of the landowners to actually get a plan together on what to do with Cherry Point, so that we can, really move that forward. And again, this goes back to the, one of the things that we're trying to do is, what does clean economic development look like? Well, part of it is actually being active in these efforts so that you can shape what ultimately gets offered up there for development. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up that I'm talking to these guys and working with them. And at some point, probably going to come back to you and say, look, we need to do this. It'll involve getting a consultant on board to help do electric and water design for the Cherry Point area. And a lot of that effort would be on us. So this was just the kind of heads up. It's not like this hasn't been done before, but it's definitely time to do it again and hopefully get something going with it. So the fourth thing I'd like to update people. Sure.
I think that completely agree with both the premise and is there any way that we might get also maybe matching funds from other local governments to help us undertake the kind of, I mean, it's kind of, I'd like to get everybody quote unquote pregnant with these ideas, you know, about economic development in Cherry Point and some even getting modest, just like Northwest River Partners wants to get Whatcom County pregnant and opposing the removal of the Snake River dams. I'd like to get all the stakeholders in this community vested to the degree possible in the idea of forward-thinking economic development in the Cherry Point industrial region. So any kind of contribution and engagement from other participants might be helpful.
So, I mean, your point's well taken. We're just not at that point yet.
Okay.
You know, we've got to figure out what it is we want to do, get a basic process together, and then clearly, you know, to the extent we can get any kind of state or federal grant to do these studies, we're going to chase after that. You know, any kind of matching funds. So, but we're just not at that point yet. At this point, I wanted to give you guys a heads up that it should be on your radar. It's something that, you know, kind of goes along with my fourth point, which is Intalco and everything going on out at Cherry Point. Okay. So lastly, I wanted to update folks on Intalco and Blue Wolf. Blue Wolf is the venture capital firm that is trying to buy the aluminum smelter out in Cherry Point from Intalco. And they're kind of at that point where what they think they have a deal with Alcoa and Intalco, and it hinges on them getting power. And they've been going back and forth with Bonneville. They have not really gotten what they want out of Bonneville. And they've recently come back to us. And so the initial proposal was that they get, it's 405 megawatt, 24-hour a day load. They were looking at getting the vast majority of that, 395 megawatts from BPA, and then getting about 9.9 megawatts from us as wheel turning load, kind of fill out the rest of it. That was the plan. They're now not sure they can do that. And what they've come back to is they're asking us, you know, will we work with them to work with BPA to try to come up with something? And of course, my answer is absolutely. We think this is a pretty good thing, and you know, we want to work with them to make it go forward. But just to let you know where it is, it's currently kind of stuck. And so Intalco, Blue Wolf they're talking among themselves, trying to figure out what their best path forward is. They think they're going to approach us and say, hey, can you come with us to BPA so that we can get everybody at the table and have a discussion on how to solve this power procurement problem. And I think that it's going to require some out of the box thinking. I think that the only way to do this is going to be perhaps something we can't even envision right now, but some combination of federal power supply, private power supply, wheeling services, and us somewhere in all of that mix. And that's where it's going to ultimately tumble out. So
I was just gonna chime in. One, I got a question from a constituent about the green attributes of the Blue Wolf and Intalco deal. So there's been quite a bit of press coverage about this, about how it's going to be the greenest aluminum smelter. And I just was wondering if you have any details from Blue Wolf about what exactly what the improvements they're planning to make to the facility actually look like. I mean, I've read the articles online too, but it's hard to get any real detail. So if you do have anything from Blue Wolf that you could share, that would be wonderful, whether you have that now or whether you get that in future discussions. And it looks like there was a head nod from Commissioner Deshmani, so maybe I think all three of us would be interested in that.
Yeah, could we maybe have a presentation from Blue Wolf at either an upcoming meeting, or if they have a document they can send us, that'd be great, because if sounds like the commission needs to go to bat, but if we're going to go to bat, we need to feel 100% sure that this really is the greenest aluminum plant in North America that's being proposed. If it is the greenest, and as you've used that analogy, Chris, about staying ahead of the bear, that's what I really believe about proactive action. There's nothing perfect. There's no perfect way to make any industrial commodity in the world. There's no perfect way. So everything has externalities. But if these guys are moving the needle in a significant way and take market share away from other facilities that are producing an inferior in ecological footprint product, then darn it, we need to put our weight 100% behind it, not just for our communities, but that's will be a benefit to the United States and putting us back on the map as a manufacturer. So I can't think of something more important. And, with all these federal dollars, maybe we should be asking for federal dollars to support this kind of endeavor, because if it really is the greenest, well, darn it, this is the kind of thing we have to do more of in this country. It's, I think, the only aluminum plant even being discussed west of the Mississippi. So just in our small part, it'd be a dream come true if I could be a part of making something better like this happen in our community.
So I'm not sure that they would present in writing, because I think a lot of what they're doing is trade secrets. What they have shared with me is a couple of things. One is that they've re-engineered the process to literally get the carbon out of the smelting process itself. And so, there's two parts to this. One is the carbon generated in the smelt, and the other is the carbon generated in making the electricity that goes into that. And those are two entirely different things. They view, locating in the Northwest as getting rid of by far the biggest piece of that, which is literally getting the carbon out of the energy source. The numbers that they shared with me, and I'll probably get this wrong, but it was something on the order of 700,000 tons of carbon that they're taking out of the smelt. So that's not the energy source, that's the smelt itself. And they weren't real forthcoming about how they were doing that, and I'm not sure they would be. The other part of it is that the state believes them, to the extent that they funded $10 million of the $30 million capital improvement to do just that. The other thing is the process that they're changing gets the fluorine out of the emissions. So, there's currently fluorine that's emitted from aluminum smelting. This removes that. I don't know if entirely or just vast majority. So aside from the carbon issues, they're looking at reducing the environmental footprint in other ways. The number that they did share was when you buy aluminum from a Chinese smelter, it takes 17 kilograms of carbon to make 1 kilogram of aluminum. This smelter is going to be in the milligrams of carbon per kilogram of aluminum, and that's about a 4 order of magnitude difference. So, I believe them that this will be the cleanest smelter in North America. Part of it is because it's here, where we've got a cleaner energy supply. But part of it is also what they propose to do with this line, with the pot lines, that appears to be a real big improvement. So yes, I'll get them to come back. I know their PR guy, David from down in Seattle. He'd be happy to come and give us a talk at our next meeting.
Thank you. Any additional details would be wonderful. And the second point that I was just going to bring up was that I think it's obvious to everybody that we need to build out renewables in the Pacific Northwest everywhere. So, if they need 405 megawatts of, affordable renewable energy to be successful, like Commissioner Deshmani said, I want to help have this be a success, but I also want to make sure that we're all playing a role in that build out, right? And so, I like that you said we might have a solution that we've never even seen before. And I just want to make sure that Blue Wolf, to the extent that we're able to, influence how this process goes forward at all, that we do look at building new renewable energy generation sources to not supply the entire project, but some of it. And I mean, having some of that be local would be great too. So, that, yeah, we might not be able to do 18 square miles of solar panels or whatever we decided it would need to be, but let's try to go to bat for our community in these discussions and see if we can get some more generation resources locally. That would be my 2 cents.
Thank you, commissioners. And that's all I have for my update, unless somebody has questions for me. Thanks.
Okay, should we move on to commissioner reports? Let's hear from Commissioner Murphy first.
Thank you. I was able to have a meeting with Chris and Steve over water issues. It was a very good meeting. So just to let you know that we talked about that. I did participate with the WPUD meetings. I did sit in the water, but O'Toole and Chris were there. And so I'll let O'Toole talk about water. I did do the governance. They said it was a wild year, just to let you know, another short season, high volume of bills. They talked about how everybody was exhausted. They say that next year will be all about climate. They said that also was reported by one of the lobbyists that next year will be a big, this coming year for 23 will be a big turnover, as there's a lot of seats opening up in the Senate and the House. So I spent a lot of time talking about those things. The other meeting I went to was the board meeting, and thought that was quite interesting. They had the nominations open for the head offices too, for president, vice president, secretary. That is going on. But one thing I wanted to bring to everybody was that, I'm sorry, there it is. I wanted to talk about BPA. Their representative was there talking, and Ferndale happened to be one of the subjects that he wanted to discuss. And the first thing that was said was that a company called Blue Wolf Capital wants to buy a company called Intelco, and that they need 400 megawatts and they will not provide. And then he went on to tell the other PUDs, if we did, it would be taking power away from all of you. He was asked that question again to repeat it, and he did repeat it, that they will not be supporting Blue Wolf Capital. So he doesn't think it's going to go anywhere. So it said that Eastern Washington, one of the PUDs over there said, but we also have a paper mill over here that's looking for 200 megawatts. And the individual said that won't be supported either. So it looks like if he's representing them, that Intelco and this paper mill in Eastern Washington will not be supported by BPA. So,
So Mike, the paper mill is actually being repowered as a Bitcoin mining operation, and they're projecting a load of 500 megawatts. So,
and not the 200. Okay.
Yeah, so it wouldn't surprise me that Bonneville wasn't going to look at that.
Okay, there was a lot of,
basically is what you're saying. It's no longer a paper mill. They're just using the electricity infrastructure.
okay, I only wrote down what the other commissioner said, that there is no power for a paper mill. So, but Chris, you know more than so. There was a lot of talk about power issues for the future to meet the growth. They said there's a 30% increase in growth in the state of Washington of people, and that there will be trouble meeting the demand for power needs. They said that once the vehicles requests are made 2025, 20 and 2030, that they fear it'll be a 50 to 60% increase in the load. and they're not sure how they're gonna supply that.
Who said
So-
that, Mike?
BPA.
Hmm. Okay.
So, I don't know. It was kind of a rough meeting, but anyhow, there's a lot of other stuff to talk about, but it's just, that's what was the main subject. It took the longest. So anyhow,
All right, well, I'll talk about what I heard in the Energy Committee during my, I heard some slightly different things, but Commissioner Deshmani, do you want to go next? Or should I go? Or there you are. Oh, you're muted.
I'm trying to grab some notes on the water committee, so.
Okay, should I
please
go
ahead.
then? Okay, well, I had my first meeting with the Whatcom Council of Governments, and that was mostly just a legislative update, mostly focused on transportation. And then also did the WAPUTA meetings, and both the kind of education roundtable one and then the telecom and energy meetings. With the Energy Committee, we had a really interesting discussion about how WAPUTA decides what its legislative kind of priorities are and how they rank bills. And that our strategic planning process that we do with WAPUTA many, many months before the legislative session is of course a really big part of how they approach the bills that come up. And the legislative session moves fast and furiously. And I think they shared that the hardest decisions that they had to make were related to electrification. So building electrification, in particular, transportation electrification. And it seems like there's a real, it was a really interesting discussion about where different PUDs see electrification and kind of the role of preparing for electrification. And so the kind of next step is that at the April meetings, where we'll all be gathered in person, we'll be having a much more in-depth conversation about electrification. And so I'm really looking forward to that and trying to prepare for that so that I feel like I'm armed with good facts and information about what I think, you know, my district in particular wants to see on electrification. So really looking, and I'm planning to attend the WAPUTA meetings in April in person. It had a few other meetings with, you know, constituents and like I mentioned before, went to the City of Bellingham's kind of public event on climate, and they did mention the PUD and our interlocal agreement at the beginning of their presentation, but it was interesting to hear from the community on that. That's kind of the highlights from me. So yeah, looking forward to my first in-person WAPUTA meetings since I've become a commissioner in April.
Christine,
Yeah.
when you said that meeting you attended, Bellingham, what was being said about us?
Oh, just the City of Bellingham's climate and clean energy manager just gave it was an event focused on public, really hearing from the public. But there was a presentation at the beginning about all the different ways that the city is trying to work on climate. And so the interlocal agreement that we signed, I don't know, 6 months ago was mentioned.
Okay.
Among, I mean, they're doing all kinds of things. But yeah, so I think that was some useful public comment for me to hear as well. So yeah, that's it for me. Commissioner Deshmani.
So the first thing is I'll mention is that in the upcoming weeks, I have a meeting I'm having with the county executive and then also with the mayor in person. We're actually going to meet in person and looking forward to talking about what the PUD's up to, but also hopefully get some idea of what their wants are in terms of their relationship with the PUD, which I hope to be able to put in an email then to the commission based on what I understand. Also planning to attend a watershed management team meeting. I think there's one in late March, if I recall. But anyway, so onto the water committee. So the water committee was short. The very much focused on the legislative update. A lot of consternation about the rating of the Public Works Trust Fund, which we all got exposed to. There was also the announcement of the water committee meeting, which is the quarterly workshop. And let's see, when is that water workshop? Maybe something. It's coming up very soon.
It's, I believe it's this week.
Is it this week? Water workshop, is that tomorrow? I mean, or Thursday?
Let me check real quick, go on, but let me check.
Okay. Yeah, so the rest of my meetings were all focused pretty much on broadband. I had 2 meetings with Chris, one which included Andrew. I had the local loops meeting. I had and other conversations around broadband. And you know, while we're figuring out how to contribute gainfully to the community, which I think we're doing a lot in that regard, and we heard a little bit more about the plans as they're evolving. I'm also very curious about discovering where we can't serve the wants and needs of the community, because the clearer we are about that up front, the less likely we are to have a situation where people from the public are saying, well, I thought you're going to do this. I thought you're going to get me high definition TV, a tool, and I'm sitting here in my living room and I still don't have high definition TV. And why the heck not? And so I'd rather be able to tell that person, I'm not gonna give you TV. So, or what, I mean, I wasn't meaning to make light at all about anybody's request. So I don't want to do that either, because there's some people who have critical needs who aren't going to get met by the PUD's actions. That I'm not doubting that, but it's better we are upfront about what we're doing so that the community can understand that, and you know, we can explore how those of us who care about our community can help explore what are the ways to get those other needs met. So that's a big focus of mine. It's important to decide what we're doing and not try to do everything. And then once we know what we're not doing, to let the influencing parties in the community figure out how to try to meet those needs. So I guess that's my summary. Any questions?
Just to note that
Had a
the
hand up.
water committee meeting is this Thursday at 9:00 a.m. And it goes till, I think it's scheduled to go till about 2:00, but there are some topics on that water committee meeting agenda that I think I'm planning on attending, because it has to do with adjudication and some things about Department of Health regulation changes. So
I just wanted to say one thing that, you know, your comment, Atul, made me think, you know, I heard from a constituent in the Deming area yesterday or the day before, and Andrew's verifying, but I believe that this constituent is in an RDOF area. And I think, and we've talked about this several times, but I do think it's really important that we work on educating the community about the limitations we have to serve those RDOF areas, and you know, I know that there's some interest from Ralph Schwartz about doing another article potentially, or learning more about broadband, but I think that it would be wonderful to kind of increase the community's awareness of what they should be expecting, frankly, from the RDOF auction. And, you know, I learned a little bit more about it, and there are, you know, rules that, for example, the RDOF winners are obligated to complete 40% of their build out by the end of the third year of funding. So RDOF happened at the end of 2020. So, I mean, we're going to be getting there pretty soon. So, again, it's not our role, and we can't get state or federal grant dollars to build there. But I do, you know, I tried to let this constituent know what was going on. And I know that others, you know, you've done that to a tool. And I was just going to say, you said that you were trying to get in touch with Ziply at the last meeting.
I did.
Do you have, so if folks get in touch with us and they live in RDOF areas, who should they be contacting from Ziply to file, you know, if they're wanting
So
to?
what I did is I had a meeting with Ziply, and then I sent an update out to the folks in their RDOF region who are around the Van Zandt community.
Yeah.
And I have a follow-up that I'm planning to do as a meeting with them. And then I also had a conversation with Chris relating to and Andrew relating to that, their Ziply's got the largest RDOF area in Whatcom County.
Mm-hmm.
And they're promising 1 gigabit wired service. So it's definitely not eligible for us. But one of the things, if it's okay, I'll share my conversation now then with you, with Ziply. And basically, this 40% number is brand new, by the way. I haven't heard that. And I don't know what that 40% of is, or how they define 40%, or if that's self-reported, just like other things are self-reported by telecoms. So the conversation was this, that they are setting priorities. They've got regions all over the Northwest where they are planning to do build outs. What's getting the higher priority is areas that are co-funded. Ziply was very much hopeful that they would get co-funded on some of the port projects. But the port ended up opting to go with, instead of Ziply, they ended up going with Pogazon. And by making that choice, that may have negatively impacted Ziply in their timing, but nonetheless, it's, you know, I mean, they've made their commitment, and they're responsible for their commitment. But it's in our interest for them to prioritize our community first, naturally. So if there's things we can do to advance the interests of the public, we should do that. And one of those ways might be finding some adjacent projects with Ziply that could get them rolling sooner. I'm heartened to hear that maybe they have to do 40% by 2023. But based on what I currently understand, it's 2022. And they're not expecting to get their engineering done until the end of this year.
Okay. Well,
so that would make
yeah.
it technically impossible to have 40%.
Yeah, I mean, the same
2023.
article that I, you know, the kind of information I found on this said that I think there's more to learn on that and how it's enforced and reported on and everything. So anyways, I just wanted to bring that up because I know that you'd been trying to do some legwork on that, and I am too. So I've looped Andrew in, and so hopefully we can just keep educating the community about the challenges of RDOF and the levers that we have, even if they're not perfect. So I know we still have public comment, and I see that there are a hand at least raised. So are all the commissioners feeling good about their commissioner reports? Head nods. Okay. Well, let's move on to public comment then. And Anne, if you can help facilitate, it looks like we actually have 3 hands up. So let's jump right in.
Rick Miracle, go ahead, Rick.
I think am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, couple comments. First, regarding solar power for Alcoa, I wanted to give a little more background of where I got the 100 square miles from. To satisfy my own curiosity, I looked at what it would take to replace the 2,800 megawatts of thermal power generated in the state of Washington with solar. And to do that, I looked at locating the solar in an area south and west of Moses Lake, and with a 99% coverage, 99 percentile coverage with storage. That required, and assuming 20% efficiency on the solar arrays, and a typical round trip efficiency on lithium ion battery storage, it came out at 700 square miles. And Alcoa is about 400, that's a seventh of that. So that's where the 100 came from. Realizing that locating that in Whatcom County would probably take a little bit more because the latitude of Whatcom County is a little higher than the latitude of Moses Lake. Secondly, on broadband, I think, and I may have heard some comments along this line, but I think you very much need to prioritize and concentrate on those areas which are not served at all currently. Raising people from 50 down, 10 up to 100 down, 20 up is not nearly as important as getting broadband, getting service to areas which have none at all. And lastly, I wanted to comment about your strategic planning process. Back in the bad old days before COVID, when the PUD would have strategic planning sessions, which of course were open to the public because all 3 commissioners were there. Those from customers and the members of the public who showed up were encouraged and invited to participate in the discussions. And this to me is what constitutes real stakeholder input. Having a 1-point survey or having a public comment section at the end after the discussion is over is merely checking a box to for appearance's sake. It's not real shareholder engagement and input. Anyway, that's my comments.
Thank you, Rick.
I just wanted to first thank Rick as well, and maybe we can follow up on this issue of input. I think in the timeline that Jim has presented, there is some work sessions public, or is there not?
He's not on anymore, but I can follow up with him about this.
Yeah, I mean, to try to factor in Rick's input, I really liked it, and how to have, instead of having it just limited to the public comment period, have us certainly customers. We don't have that many customers. It's not that hard to include them in conversations at a workshop, and might be appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Next, we have Todd Legacy again.
Todd, we are muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you. I want to apologize a little bit for just saying solar and Intalco and not doing the math. However, having made it through the Navy's nuclear power school program, I would love to sit down with this other gentleman, Rick Miracle, and work out the math, because my calculations show it's about 10 to 20 square miles. But it doesn't matter, and I'm not going to make you sit through my math calculations here. It doesn't matter whether it's 10, 20, or 40 square miles for solar and Intalco. It's about what kind of mindset you want to have. And if you start to look at the available rooftop space in Blaine, Birch Bay, Ferndale, at the refineries, and even in Talco itself, it starts to seem less and less imposing. And as I said, it's about a mindset. Are we in a mindset of abundance, or are we in a mindset of scarcity? Are we envisioning a future we want, or are we scared and frozen in inaction? Kudos to Commissioner Murphy for bringing up wind. Thank you very much for that, sir. I would also add tidal power. There's a lot of opportunity in the currents generated in Puget Sound between the islands by tidal flows. At one point, Whatcom County even put a class on for kayakers and sailboaters about the impacts and how to calculate the tidal flows. And my hope, being on the Lummy Island Ferry Advisory Committee, is that it someday Hales Passage might actually generate the electricity, and combined with wind and storage, the ferry wouldn't even need, an electric ferry there wouldn't even need outside power. And then I would like to talk a little bit about resilience here. Resilience isn't just words on a paper. Resilience is actually action. It's strategy, but also combined with tactics. And as a firefighter, I would say an example of resilience is in action is when you design a Firewise house between the urban and wildland interface. You want to put a metal roof on, you cut the big trees back, you do Firewise landscaping, you put cement siding on. And so that's actual resilience as well. Resilience is where the rubber meets the road in how we design our government agencies, in the requirements that they have and the services they deliver as we face these adverse problems coming forward from climate change, or even as we talk about what type of development should be done down at the port, because nobody talks about the tsunami impacts. So that's where I'd like to close. And just in looking at the Northwest River Partners website, Whatcom PUD is listed as a member on their website. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Todd. Do we have any other hands up, Ann?
No other hands raised.
Okay, great. Well, do we have anything else today for the good of the order?
Just one last comment, real quick. This is World Water Day. So celebrate what we have, celebrate what we're trying to accomplish, and celebrate our engagement in the community. So leave it.
Thank you,
And
Steve.
yeah, thank you. And then are we didn't, this didn't come up in your report, Chris, but we're going to aim for a hybrid meeting on April 12th?
Thank you. Yes, we're going to aim to have it open to the public, but it'll be also open on Zoom. So commissioners, if you want to attend in person, we'll have the room open. I'll be there. If you want to attend on Zoom, we'll have Zoom open and I'll be there. And
I'll attempt to make some space on the table for you too.
Commissioner, I'll just add that General Manager Heimgartner completed his OPMA, PRA, and record retention training last week.
Great. Okay. Anything else, fellow commissioners? Okay. Well, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining today's meeting. And the meeting is now closed. Have a great day,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.